It started with a little boy dancing, barefoot on a polished gym floor, and ended with a mayor standing in front of a stunned crowd, confessing something he'd kept buried for years. But before that, there was silence, judgment, a black mother shamed for trusting her son, and a deaf child humiliated by the people meant to celebrate him. This wasn't a scandal, it wasn't an accident, it was a decision, one small gesture that changed everything. And when the cameras finally turned on, it wasn't the mayor in the spotlight, it was Zion. Tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? The gym smelled like sweat and floor polish. Not a bad smell, just one that made Imani Carter feel like she was back in high school. The folding chairs were already lined up along the wall, sunlight slanting in through tall windows that had never had proper curtains. The town didn't have money for that. They barely had money for Unity Day, but every year they pulled it together. Volunteers, donations, favors called in from parents and cousins, and whoever still gave a damn about their little town. And this year, Imani had offered to help with the choreography. It wasn't something she did for attention. She never had. She wasn't a spotlight person. But when she saw the flyer about needing someone to lead the Unity Day group dance, she felt something stir, a chance to be part of something again. To show Zion he could belong, not just in the margins, not just at the edge of the room watching other kids. She wanted him in it. Zion was 8. He had wide eyes and a serious face, but when he smiled, everything around him softened. He didn't talk, not in words most people understood, but when he danced, he told stories, and Imani had seen it. Felt it. At home in their kitchen, in their small apartment above the laundromat, he'd move in a way that made her stop and forget about everything else. The bills, the neighbors arguing downstairs, the ache in her back. He didn't know he was doing it. He was just being Zion. Now they were here, in the community center gym, standing in a line with other parents, teenagers, some of the town council, and the mayor, Mayor Richard Holloway. Always in a navy suit, even at 10 in the morning, even in a gym with no air conditioning. He wasn't cold, not exactly, just distant. The kind of man who remembered your name but never asked how you were doing. Imani didn't mind him, didn't admire him either. He was just part of the town, like the old clock tower or the broken streetlight that never got fixed. The rehearsal started slow, people chatting, some half committed to the steps, others trying to take it seriously. Imani had prepared a simple routine, nothing fancy. A few counts of 8, some hand claps, a circle movement, a rhythm anyone could follow. She had thought, maybe naively, that if she made it accessible, no one would get left behind. But Zion struggled. He could follow the tempo, but not the beat of the music he couldn't hear. He watched the others, but their timing was inconsistent. He signed to her, asking if he was doing it wrong. She smiled and signed back, "No, you're doing fine, just keep going." But she could see it, the glances, the sighs. One of the older women from the town's heritage committee looked at Zion like he was a disruption. Another mom whispered something to her friend and they both snickered. Imani's chest tightened. She could feel her heart pounding in her throat. She stepped forward, touched Zion's shoulder gently. Then she did something she hadn't planned. She backed away and let him lead. She signed to him, "Show them your way. You remember, go ahead." Zion paused, looked at her, then stepped forward. He lifted his hands and began to move. His motions were slower, fuller, more expressive than the original choreography, but they were beautiful. He moved his arms like waves. His steps were deliberate. He didn't rush. He wasn't copying anymore. He was showing, telling a different story. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then Imani joined him, then a teenager, then another. The steps shifted to match his rhythm. People followed, unsure at first, then more naturally. It wasn't the planned routine anymore. It was something else. And in the corner of the room, Mayor Holloway stood watching, his hands folded, his face unreadable. The moment passed, the music ended, the group clapped awkwardly, someone joked about freestyling too early, and just like that, it was over. The others packed up. The councilwoman mentioned tightening things up before the final performance. Imani caught the tone. Zion tugged at her hand, signing that he liked it. She smiled, nodded, but something in her felt off, like a string had been pulled too hard and might snap. As they walked to their car, she looked back at the building, wondering if anyone had really seen what had happened, if they even understood what they'd witnessed. It wasn't until 3 days later that Imani realized something had shifted. At first, it was just a feeling, something vague and heavy that sat between her shoulders. She brushed it off, telling herself it was nothing, just her overthinking things, just the aftertaste of that strange rehearsal. But then the calls started. First, it was a polite message from Susan Rawlins, the event coordinator, asking if they could touch base about a few changes to the Unity Day performance schedule. Imani agreed, not thinking much of it. When she showed up at the community center conference room, there were 3 people already waiting: Susan, another woman from the council, and Mayor Holloway himself. They didn't greet her with the same warmth as before. Susan smiled, tight-lipped, and gestured for her to sit. No one offered her water. The mayor sat with his arms crossed, nodding silently as Susan began explaining, slowly and carefully, that while everyone appreciated her energy and contributions, there had been some concerns raised about the dance portion of the event, specifically about clarity, about cohesion, about mixed signals that might arise from having untrained choreography at a public event that represents the whole town. The words sounded polished, rehearsed, but the message was sharp and cold underneath. Imani listened, her stomach turning, trying to follow the coded language they were using. They weren't talking about choreography. They were talking about Zion, about the fact that a deaf black child had taken the lead in a space where they hadn't expected or wanted him to. She kept her face still, nodding slowly, saying little. Susan went on, suggesting maybe a professional dance teacher could come in to tighten things up, and that perhaps Imani could still help in a more supportive role. No one said the word removed, but that's what it was. When she finally left the meeting, she didn't go home right away. She sat in her car, staring at the steering wheel, fighting off tears that came slow and quiet. She wasn't crying just for herself. She was crying for the look Zion would give her when she told him, for the words she'd have to find to explain something he didn't deserve. How do you tell your child he did something beautiful and that it still wasn't enough? That evening, she sat him down. He was on the living room rug with his dinosaurs, humming softly, not words, just vibrations. She signed to him carefully, slowly, explaining that some changes were happening with the event, that someone else would help finish the dance part, that they still wanted him to be part of it, but not in front. He paused, looked at her, then he signed, "They don't want me." Just that, simple, final. Her heart cracked open. The next few days were quiet. Zion stopped dancing at home, stopped humming. At school, his teacher emailed saying he was withdrawn. Imani tried to keep things normal, pancakes on Sunday, puzzles in the evening, but something had dimmed in him, and in her. She thought about backing out entirely, but a part of her didn't want to give them that, didn't want to disappear and prove them right. She told herself maybe it was better to stay, even in the background, be present, just not heard. Meanwhile, something else was happening, quietly, online. A clip had surfaced. One of the teenagers from rehearsal had recorded Zion's impromptu leading moment and posted it on TikTok with a caption that read, "The kid dancing is deaf, he slayed." At first, it didn't get much attention, but then it started circulating, a few shares. Then more. Some local pages picked it up. The comments rolled in. Most supportive, some confused, a handful mean. Imani found the video late one night and watched it alone. She didn't know whether to be proud or scared. Then came the messages. One anonymous comment called her manipulative for putting her disabled child in the spotlight. Another claimed she was using him for emotional bait. Someone emailed the community center complaining that the performance was turning into a woke mess. A letter was taped to her apartment door the next morning. No signature, just typed words. "Stop using your son. You're embarrassing yourself." Imani didn't tell anyone about it. Not the school, not the committee. She just tore the paper into tiny pieces and flushed them down the toilet. But something inside her shifted. A small, solid piece of her started to calcify. She stopped apologizing at meetings, spoke only when directly asked, smiled politely, and let the others run things. But she watched them closely now, listened to the way they spoke in circles, the way they justified exclusion by calling it structure. Mayor Holloway said little during these meetings. He would nod, listen, once or twice give a generic, "let's keep things smooth." Imani didn't expect him to defend her, but she had hoped maybe he'd at least say something real, something human. Instead, he remained polite and absent, a well-dressed ghost who presided without presence. At home, Zion was quiet, but Imani could feel the sadness in him. It wasn't loud, but it was steady. She'd find him standing in front of the mirror sometimes, moving his hands in the air like he was testing something, like he wasn't sure his body still knew how to dance. And when he caught her watching, he'd stop, go back to his room. No tantrums, just silence. It was worse than a scream. Elsewhere in town, things moved on. Banners went up. Flyers were printed. Unity Day, one town, one voice. Imani saw them in windows, on lampposts, at the school entrance. The irony stung. She didn't say anything, just kept showing up, helping where she could, making herself useful. That was the unspoken agreement. Be helpful, be quiet, stay small. One afternoon, while prepping food trays at the center, a woman from the senior club, Judith, a retired ballet teacher, came up to her. She was in her 70s, white, soft-voiced, but sharp-eyed. She took Imani's hand, gently, and said, "I saw the video. The way your boy moves. That's not taught. That's felt. Don't let them dull that, honey." Then she squeezed her hand and walked away. Imani stood frozen for a few seconds. It was the first kindness she'd received in weeks. What she didn't know was that Judith had mentioned Zion to the mayor in passing. At a different event, small talk over tea and scones. "That little deaf boy moved me more than all the speeches you've given this year, Richard," she said with a chuckle. He had smiled, thanked her, nodded. But that night at home, Richard Holloway watched the video for the first time, really watched it. He saw Imani stepping back, letting her son take over, saw the shift in the room, the hesitancy, the uncertainty, then the surrender. He saw the boy's face, focused, proud. He watched the video twice, then again, and something inside him stirred, something uncomfortable, a memory, a shadow he'd pushed down for years. He turned off the screen, sat in the dark and said nothing. In the following weeks, the final plans for Unity Day solidified. The revised performance had a new leader, a young woman from a local dance studio, talented, polished, articulate. Zion was given a role on the side, waving a flag in the background. Imani accepted it without protest. Zion didn't complain. He just nodded, said, "Okay." That night he didn't touch his dinner. Richard Holloway continued his appearances, ribbon cuttings, press interviews, speeches about community and togetherness. But something in his tone had changed. Subtle, but different. A hesitancy in his eyes, a stiffness in his delivery. He avoided looking at Imani during meetings, and when he did, it was quick, almost ashamed. The week before the event, another video clip surfaced, a longer version this time. It showed the full moment from rehearsal, the original steps, the struggle, the pause. Then Zion stepping forward, the others following. It was clumsy, imperfect, and beautiful. The post went viral across regional news pages. Comments flooded in. Some called it inspiring. Others called out the town for removing him from the performance. No one from the council addressed it publicly. The mayor declined to comment. And still, Imani stayed quiet. Still, Zion didn't dance. And still, the town marched forward toward Unity Day, banners fluttering in the wind, loudspeakers ready, the stage set. The morning of Unity Day arrived with clear skies and the kind of quiet that feels like the world is holding its breath. The town center was already busy by 8. Booths being set up, volunteers in matching shirts carrying coolers, adjusting signage, arranging chairs in long, neat rows in front of the stage. Families trickled in wearing red, white and blue, kids with painted faces, older couples holding hands, teenagers loitering near the snack tables. Everything looked right, everything looked proud, but Imani Carter stood near the back, clutching a water bottle she hadn't opened, her heart full of noise no one else could hear. Zion was with her, holding the small cloth flag he'd been given, dressed in the plain white t-shirt and jeans the performers had been told to wear. He looked like every other child in the group except for his eyes. They weren't excited, they were still, watching, absorbing everything like he wasn't really part of it anymore. Imani crouched beside him and signed softly that he looked handsome. He gave a tiny smile, then looked away. Mayor Holloway arrived last, as always polished, buttoned up, shaking hands, smiling, thanking donors. But something about him seemed thinner today, like the surface he kept so carefully intact was starting to wear down. His assistant hovered close, whispering updates, cue times, reminders, but Richard barely responded. He looked out at the crowd, the stage, the children warming up for the performance, and then let his eyes fall briefly, just briefly, on Imani and Zion. She saw it, that flicker, that weight, and then he looked away again. The program began with the anthem, then speeches from local leaders, applause, polite laughter, everything moving along the way it always did. Imani barely heard any of it. Her pulse beat in her ears. She didn't know why. She wasn't on stage. She wasn't being asked to speak or perform, and still, something felt like it was pushing up against her chest, asking to be let out. Then came the dance, the final group routine. The music started, bright and familiar, and the kids took their places. The choreography was crisp, clean, exactly as rehearsed. Zion stood in the back row, moving in time, flag waving in small, synchronized motions. He wasn't off, but he wasn't alive in it. His body was there, but he wasn't dancing. Imani felt it like a physical absence, like watching someone perform their own outline. Then something happened. It was subtle at first. One of the teenage girls near the front, the same one who had posted the original clip, paused, missed a beat, turned slightly, looked back, looked at Zion, then shifted her steps, slowed down, matched his rhythm. Another kid noticed, then another. Within seconds, the whole group had started moving differently. The music hadn't changed, but the mood had. The pattern broke. The flag waving stopped. Instead, the children began to move in sweeping, expressive gestures, the same ones Zion had shown during that first rehearsal. They hadn't forgotten. They'd just been waiting for permission. Zion froze, confused. Then the girl at the front nodded to him, a small, certain nod, and that was all it took. He stepped forward, slowly, let go of the flag, moved his hands with intent, his arms extended, then bent like flowing water. The others followed him. For a moment, the choreography dissolved completely, and what took its place was something unplanned, unrefined, but real. People in the audience stood up. Phones were lifted. You could hear gasps, not at the performance, but at the fact that the group had just handed the stage to the boy everyone thought had been pushed to the side. Backstage, Susan was already stepping toward the mic, whispering to the sound crew, ready to cut the music, restore order. But Mayor Holloway raised a hand, stopped her. Then he walked to the front of the stage. When the music faded, the applause was loud, but uneven, half celebratory, half unsure. The mayor stepped forward, and the noise died. He looked down at Zion, then out at the crowd. He didn't take the mic, he just spoke, voice low but steady, carrying over the silent crowd. "I want to tell you what I saw today," he said, "and what I failed to see before." He paused, took a breath. You could feel the air shift. Even the kids stood still. Weeks ago, at a rehearsal for this very event, something remarkable happened. A young boy who couldn't hear the music led a room full of people using nothing but movement, courage, and trust. And I saw it. I stood in the back and watched it happen, and I said nothing. I let fear of reaction, of disruption, of difference guide my silence. People were quiet, the kind of quiet where no one checks their phones, no one whispers. I watched a mother step back and allow her child to lead, something I, as a father, once failed to do. I watched a room of people adapt to a new rhythm, and I let others call it unstructured. I let them push it aside, I let them push him aside. He turned toward Imani, locking eyes with her for the first time in weeks. That was my failure. Imani felt her throat tighten. She didn't move. Zion stood next to her, watching the mayor, not fully grasping every word, but feeling the shift in the room, feeling the weight change. "I don't want to give a speech about unity today," the mayor said. "I want to show you what it looks like when someone teaches you something you didn't expect to learn." Then quietly, he stepped off the stage, walked to Zion, kneeling so they were eye to eye. He signed, awkwardly, hesitantly, "Thank you." It wasn't perfect. The motion was stiff, but Zion's face lit up. just a flicker, but it was real. The rest of the day moved on, but differently. Something had cracked open. People approached Imani not with pity or small talk, but with gratitude. Some apologized. Others asked how they could support her weekend movement classes, a program she hadn't even launched yet, but had been quietly planning in her notebook for months. A woman from the neighboring town's school district asked if she'd consider speaking at their inclusion forum. Judith hugged her so hard she nearly lost her breath. Zion didn't say much. But that night, as they walked back to their car, he took her hand and signed, "Can we dance again tomorrow?" And that was the moment Imani felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Not victory, not revenge, just something simple, something steady, like peace. In the weeks that followed, the video of that final performance spread further than any of them expected. Not because of production quality or perfection, but because it showed something raw, something people had been aching to see, someone being given back their voice, even when that voice didn't come from sound. Mayor Holloway announced he wouldn't seek re-election. No drama, no scandal, just a quiet stepping aside. He started volunteering with youth services, especially programs involving disability access and inclusion. He visited Imani's new dance space once, helped set up folding chairs, said little, just smiled and stayed until every chair was in place. Zion's face became familiar in the town, not because he was a symbol, but because he was just there, at the library, at school events, sometimes leading warm-ups before dance class. People waved, some joined. He danced again, and again, and again. Sometimes change doesn't come in protests or policies. Sometimes it comes when a boy moves his hands in the air and the world finally stops talking long enough to listen. If you felt something from this story, tell us in the comments. What does courage mean to you? There is a story here on the screen that will also move you. Press to watch. You won't regret it.